some reason, I am now frozen. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
For some reason, my screen is frozen, but let me just.
Yeah, sometimes you have to go back and just retry again, Susan.
Yep, I'm trying to. Let's see what is going on here. This normally doesn't happen. My complete screen is frozen. Just give me one moment here. Right now, I'm not able to do anything. Please hold on. It's churning slowly. I do apologize. My screen is frozen. I'm not sure what's going on. Let's try it again.
Rudy, can you hear me now? This is Susan Canrick.
Yeah.
Susan Canrick.
I can't, it won't move. I can't stop sharing. Yeah. One more time. Sharing. Now it says my screen sharing is paused. Why is that? I will try again. I do apologize. I'm just not sure what's going on. It says your screen sharing is paused.
Susan, maybe see if why don't you try logging out and come back in and see what happens.
I will do that. I apologize for that.
Okay, we have a slight delay here, and as soon as Susan, the guest speaker, logs on, see if it works. And we go to a plan B where I'll ask her to send the PowerPoint to Susan Canrick. We can go through the slideshow.
Rudy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. That's what I was going to suggest, that Susan send me her PowerPoint and then I'll flip through slides for her.
Yes, I was going to suggest that to her. You know, I asked her to log off and log back in. I don't believe she's logged back in yet. Yeah, Susan.
Let's try it again. All right.
Okay, and Susan, we have a plan B in case it doesn't work.
I need to be permitted to host again.
Yeah, I think you have, let's see. Okay, all right.
I
You're
have
a
now made her co-host.
You're a co-host now.
Okay.
There we go.
Yay.
Success.
Thank you so much for your patience. I truly appreciate that. So I'm going to start off first just talking a little bit about American Water, just to give you a perspective. So American Water was founded in 1886, and we have been serving customers for more than 130 years. We are the largest publicly traded water and wastewater utility company, and we cover a lot of ground. Our size and our scale differentiate us from others in the water industry. We actually treat and deliver 1 billion gallons of water per day. We have approximately 7,000 employees. So we have a regulated and a non-regulated business. I work in the regulated business. I just want to kind of put that in perspective as well. The map highlights those states where we provide, we're a regulated company. Pennsylvania American Water and New Jersey American Water are about the same size in terms of revenue, but for Pennsylvania American Water, we're much more dispersed throughout the Commonwealth. But you can see in terms of the miles of mains transmission that the regulated companies have across the United States. That's 53,200. You see the number of water treatment plants, our groundwater treatment plants, our groundwater wells, and we have 150 wastewater treatment plants. The company started out and has focused on water for many, many years. Pennsylvania American Water, which is one of the subsidiaries, was the first of American Water subsidiaries that started in the wastewater business. And we continue to grow both the water and the wastewater, but a large focus has been on wastewater, and I'll share with you why. So I said we have a regulated business, this is American Water, and we have a non-regulated or a market-based business. So with the market-based business, it's twofold. American Water has entered into several contracts with the Department of Defense to operate and maintain their water and wastewater systems on military bases. And then we have what we call our homeowner services group, where we provide protection in terms of water line, sewer line, protection, homeowners. If you particularly have a home that's not new, it's not uncommon for you to have leaks on your service line from time to time, and so and wastewater from time to time. And so that part of the business engages in providing repair services for water and sewer. Now I just want to focus for a moment on Pennsylvania American Water. And so you can see on the map where we provide water service, and that's in the lighter blue. And in the darker blue, you will see where we provide water and wastewater service. We serve approximately 2.4 million people. We're actually located in, it's actually 37 counties of the 60 counties in Pennsylvania. And you see what our water customer base looks like. It's primarily residential. And that's going to be interesting as I talk about COVID-19 and the impact there. And then we have 7% commercial and 1% industrial. And then as it relates to wastewater service, we have 79,000 wastewater customers. And again, for Pennsylvania, looking at our infrastructure, you see we have 91% surface water, 7% groundwater. We have 52 regulated dams. And then you see our active groundwater sources. And then you look at our treatment plants. We have 37 surface water treatment plants. We are very proud of the partnerships for safe water awards that we've received. And that's in partnership with the Environmental Protection Agency, where we have actually exceeded the regulations that we are required to comply with. And then we have 23 wastewater treatment plants. And then you can look at the miles of mains. We have 11,457 storage facilities. You see the number there, 265. And then with regard to our water and wastewater pumping stations, you can see what we have in that arena here in Pennsylvania.
Hey, Susan, may I interrupt?
Sure.
We got a comment that if you can go into full screen mode, more of the slides would be legible.
Okay, I'm
Is that
sorry.
possible
Let's
to do
see.
that?
Let's hold on 1 second here. I thought I was. Display screen. No, that's not it. All right. Full, because I'm showing full, I thought I was showing full screen.
Yeah, we're seeing not only the full screen portion of it, but also the next slide.
Okay, let's see.
I think full screen is that open.
Tell me what I need to do.
Down the bottom, second from the right.
Second from the right?
Yeah, second from the right. That's it. I think that's your full screen mode switch.
No, this is a capture titles and subtitles. Not sure that's it. Okay, hold on. Okay. You know, someone did show me how to do this once before.
Yeah.
Let me just figure it out.
Are you in Google Slides?
Is that better? No?
Same size.
No.
I think it's because your notes slides are open, the notes on the right.
Okay, hold on.
If there's someone
There
who,
you go.
yeah.
Wait a minute.
That
Is
works.
this it? Is this?
That'll, we still see the sidebar, but it's really good. So better
Let
than
me-
before.
Better.
Let me go back. Is this better or you still see the full? Are you
No,
back?
That's worse.
All right.
I actually think that, yeah, well, yeah.
Is that better again? Sorry.
Yeah, we still see the slides on the side, but they're small, and we see the main slide as the main picture. So that's probably pretty good.
All right.
Definitely better.
Okay.
Yeah, this is better.
Okay, great. So as I share with you information about Pennsylvania America, I'm just going to go back to just the American water slide so you have some sense of what that looks like in terms of the map. As I was highlighting the blue for you, and then looking at the next slide, looking at the blue, these regulated business, you see California, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. We have regulated business in Georgia. It's very small, but that does give you some sense. And then I'm going to jump to the next slide, which really demonstrates for you the water service in the blue, light blue, and then the darker blue represents the water and wastewater service. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about critical infrastructure. And you know better than I do that the US energy infrastructure fuels the economy for the 21st century, and without a stable energy supply, the health and welfare are threatened. Our US economy cannot function. And the Presidential Policy Directive 21 identified the energy sector as a uniquely critical because it provides an enabling function across all critical infrastructure sectors. And you're going to see how the functions of the energy, particularly electric, impacts the water industry when in fact there is the power is out. More than 80% of the country's energy infrastructure is owned by the private sector. And then when we look at water, safe drinking water is a prerequisite for protecting the public health and all human activity. And when you think about utility service, water is the one utility service that you ingest. Properly treated wastewater is vital for, of course, preventing disease and protecting the environment. So ensuring the supply of drinking water and wastewater treatment and service is essential to modern day life and the nation's economy. And so many times, I know for myself, I worked at the Public Utility Commission, and my focus was on telecommunications at the time and some energy. It was around the time of the deregulation of the electric industry that I was at the commission. When I got my position with the water company, I'm being very transparent. The only thing I really knew about water is when I went to turn my faucet on and the water was coming out. That's all that I really thought about water, because quite frankly, I took it for granted. And a lot of us take it for granted until what? When we don't have it. So when it comes to disasters, whether it's natural, COVID-19, utility companies, electric, gas, water, wastewater, and other critical infrastructure companies are oftentimes singled out in rapid response to keep essential systems operating, and in case of outages, and to restore service quickly. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of utility infrastructure, and the discussion will cover legal, regulatory, and policy issues. So 2020, 2021, what have we faced as from a country, as a country? We've had unprecedented challenges. We had cyber attack. Where in February this year, you had a hacker that gained remote access to a water treatment plant. And then, wow, weather disasters, hurricanes, the California wildfires. And when we think about, even with hurricane, we just had Hurricane Ida. It was one of the most deadly and destructive Category 4 Atlantic hurricanes that has become the second most damaging and intense hurricane to strike the United States, in particular Louisiana, of record, behind Hurricane Katrina. And it's tied to the strongest landfall in the state by maximum winds. With Hurricane Laura last year, the storm is called catastrophic flooding across the Northeast. I don't know whether or not in your area you experienced flooding. We did experience some flooding here in central Pennsylvania. It did not impact our water system. There was flooding in the Philadelphia area, and it has actually impacted some of the water utilities in that area. Ida is the 6th costliest tropical cyclone of record, estimated to have cost at least $50 billion and is counting. Additionally, when we looked at Ida, you look at the wind, how widespread it was, not only in the US, but the Caribbean islands, the Gulf of Mexico. It certainly has made an impact and has impacted a large number of people, a large number of utility customers. Widespread heavy infrastructural damage has occurred in the southeastern portion of Louisiana. Power line damage was extensive throughout the cities, New Orleans and other cities in Louisiana. There has been significant plant destruction in the state. And as you know, you've seen, it's caused flooding in New York. We've all dealt with COVID-19 individually, but also utility companies have dealt with and are continuing to deal with the impact of COVID-19. Going to talk about a little bit today the impact of the storms that occurred in 2021, the winter storm that actually occurred in 2021, where you had, again, a significant power outage. And then that, a week or 2 weeks later, that storm and those outages actually impacted the water utilities in Texas. I'm sure you all know about the Texas power crisis and the damage to the Texas power grid. And again, that in fact impacted the water companies. There were municipal water companies as well as private water companies. And you had about 1.4 million Texans who faced water disruptions for more than a week after the Texas winter storms actually wreaked havoc on the state's power grid and water service. People were completely without running water, beginning on an afternoon on Wednesday, and that the outages were due to water main breaks, mechanical failures, frozen or broken water lines, and other issues, because no power in individuals' homes, their pipes froze because there was no power, and it was extremely, extremely cold. When you talk about COVID-19, it impacted companies in terms of the identification of essential critical infrastructure workers by the United States government, by the US government, as well as by Pennsylvania government. There was significant collaboration early on, starting in late February, but in particular during March, between all of the utility companies, electric, gas, water, telco, with the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission that actually regulates on the electric and gas side, the distribution, and then on the water side, the entire system, collaborating with the PUC, with the Department of Transportation, with the Department of Community and Economic Development, making sure that supply chains were active and available. Projects were underway by utility companies. There was Department of Transportation who, for a period of time, stopped the issuance of permits. And so it was a cross-functional working group with utility companies, state agencies, state regulators, and also on the local front. Additionally, many people, the vast majority of people, began to work from home. And so that increase in services on the residential side, and then you were seeing a decrease on the industrial side and on the commercial side, because there were many commercial establishments that were closed. And then on the industrial side, you had some, depending on the industry, where there was closure for some for a short period of time or reduction in services. And then on the residential side, you had the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission imposed a moratorium on utility companies in terms of shut off of service. Starting in March of 2020, that moratorium was not lifted until the November of 2020, and there were certain conditions that utilities had to comply with, and certain classes of customers, depending on where they fell within the federal poverty level, in terms of providing assistance, continuing service through payment arrangements. And so utility companies were in fact impacted by COVID-19. So we're going to talk about from an infrastructure and the importance, talk about it from tools that have been provided through legislation, through regulation, and implementation. And then we're going to take on a case study to talk about it. So when we talk about the regulated industry, we talk about here in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission that regulates the rates and services of the water and wastewater industry, as well as the electric and gas distribution, because we know that the generation has actually been deregulated. For many who have services that are provided by regulated public utilities, you think of rate cases. You'll receive a notice in your bill that the utility company has actually filed for a rate increase, particularly on the water side, on a more frequent basis, on a less frequent basis on the electric and gas side, although there are a number of rate cases that were filed 2021 and 2021. And many had said, well, why are you filing cases now? We have COVID-19, we're all struggling. But one of the points is that, as you know, on the electric side and infrastructure and capital that's needed to invest, that takes a lot of planning, and preparing for rate cases usually starts anywhere from 9 to 12 months out before you decide to make a decision that you're going to file. But a tool that came into play in 2012, particularly for the electric and gas distribution, is what's called system improvement charge. And I'll talk a little bit later, because for the water industry, we've had a system improvement charge since 1996. It was recodified in 2012 with the passage of the Act 11 that was signed by Governor Corbett at the time, that allowed jurisdictional, and that means public utilities who fall within the Pennsylvania public utility jurisdiction, water and wastewater utilities, natural gas distribution companies, city natural gas distribution operations, and that would be Philadelphia Gas Works, and then electric gas distributions. The law allowed those companies to petition the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission for the implementation of the Distribution System Improvement Charge, or DISC. And the DISC is designed to provide for timely recovery of reasonable and prudent costs incurred to not only repair, but to improve or replace what we call eligible property to ensure and maintain adequate, efficient, safe, reliable, and reasonable service. And when we talk about the distribution system, that is a system that's owned and operated by the utility company. And that term includes the natural gas distribution companies, the electric distribution companies, and the water companies as well. It allows for what we call in the utility industry non-revenue producing improvements to be funded through interim rate increases, which are separate from what I talked about, rate cases. And it's actually a surcharge that will be on a customer's utility bill. And it enables, again, investment to be funded on an ongoing basis with regulatory oversight, but without a rate case proceeding. Again, it's limited to revenue neutral projects so that the DISC does not increase the revenue. So what kinds of, what type of property is eligible and is covered by a DISC? On the water side, you see there, it's the utility service line, it's meters, it's hydrants, it's mains, it's valves that's installed to replace existing facilities that have worn out or in deteriorated conditions. It's main extensions installed to eliminate a dead end. So there are, you may have, for example, in a cul-de-sac or on a street, you may have a main, it stops, it ends. And so through DISC, you can extend that main and it will fall under the recovery for DISC. It also provides for cleaning. On the wastewater, it's the collection sewers, it's collection mains, it's the service laterals, and that's connecting to the home of the customer. Sewer taps, curb stops is in the right of way. Collection main and valves for gravity and pressure systems, because wastewaters can be a gravity system or it can be a pressure system. Any related facilities such as manholes, grinder pumps, Mainline flow meters are covered by that. When you look at on the electric side, under DIS, it's the poles, it's towers, overhead and underground conductors, transformers and substations equipments, and any fixtures or devices related to those items, including circuit breakers and fuses and cross arms and brackets. It's any unreimbursed costs related to highway relocation projects where you have to, the electric distribution system must relocate its facilities. On the natural gas side, you're looking at piping and coupling and gas service lines and insulation and non-insulation and excessive flows, meters. Those are the items that are eligible for recovery under this distribution system improvement charge. So what do you need to do in order to, what do the utility companies needed to do in order to be able to authorize to implement a DIS? What needed to happen is we file a tariff. And what is a tariff? A tariff is actually our a document that we file with the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, which outlines the rates. It outlines rules and regulations, and as it relates to DIS, it outlines the DIS that we want to charge, the items that are covered under that. And you also, as a part of that legal document, that petition, it included testimony. In most instances for utility companies, it was testimony from engineers, testimony from accountants who are involved as what we call our rate directors. It includes exhibits, and those exhibits needed to demonstrate that the DIS will actually ensure adequate, efficient, safe, and reliable service. It also included an infrastructure plan, and that plan will include, for a 5-year period, the projects and that would be covered under the DIS. It included how you're going to timelines. It also included estimated costs, the costs that you're planning, your capital costs that will be covered in order to fund those projects. It includes things related to communications with customers, collaborations with contractors. And that plan, as I said, is a 5-year plan on a yearly basis. After the plan is actually approved, companies must meet with the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission's technical staff. We file on an annual basis an update, which shows what we've actually accomplished within that 1-year period, the dollars that have been spent, and any projections for changes based on the initial plan. Again, as a part of that petition, companies must have filed a rate case within 5 years. And the petition, which would include the plan, must demonstrate that the charge will actually accelerate the replacement of the infrastructure. So that is key. And the commission staff will review that plan. There are other parties outside the commission that will get involved. The Small Business Advocate in Pennsylvania, the Office of Consumer Advocate will be involved in that proceeding. And once the plan is reviewed, a decision a recommended decision is issued, and the commission will actually act on that recommended decision at a public meeting. It is a very intense process, particularly for the gas and electric after this legislation was established, because it was their first time having to prepare these types of documents for the commission's approval and to address each and every item. On the water side, the DISC had been in place since 1996. And I'll share with you some statistics, particularly as it relates to Pennsylvania American Water, which will show what has been the benefit for the DISC in terms of accelerating the replacement of main. So when we talk about implementation, I want to use as a case example the winter storms of Raleigh and Quinn in 2018, and I'm going to focus on here the electric industry. And some of you may recall these were two nor'easter winter events that occurred during the first week in March of 2018, and it significantly impacted Pennsylvania and the electric distribution companies. The first storm, Raleigh, began on a Thursday on March 1st, and it lasted until March 3rd. Raleigh was a powerful storm that produced wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour, rain that changed into heavy, wet snow throughout Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, the biggest storm impacts were experienced in southeastern, eastern, and the northeastern regions of Pennsylvania, particularly the greater Philadelphia area, your area, Lehigh Valley, and the Poconos is saturated the soil. Heavy snow and winds caused downed trees and power lines, infrastructure damages, and widespread transportation issues. It caused approximately 680,000 electric customers outages at peak, which occurred between approximately 11 p.m. on March 2nd. And then on March 7th, the second winter storm, Quinn, delivered additional heavy, wet snow and high winds. The snow accumulations was up to 14 inches in some areas that already had the first storm, as Quinn arrived prior to the completion, some of you may remember, of the electric restoration from the Raleigh storm. The electric outages caused by Quinn were generally much less severe than Raleigh, with the exception of PECO Energy in Bucks County. And PECO's total system outages increased from approximately 12,000 as of 8 a.m. on March 7th to approximately 100,000 at 8 p.m. And then Quinn complicated and prolonged the restoration efforts in most areas. In terms of outages caused by Raleigh and Quinn, the clear majority of customers, 83% at peak hour, were actually restored at 8 p.m. on March 5th, and then all customers were restored by March 13th. One of the things that complicated and prolonged with the restoration was the travel and work for the restoration crews. All of the electric distribution companies worked to coordinate road openings with county staff so that crews could get to the down lines and reopen roads, because there were many roads that were had been closed. There was snow that needed to be removed, and then with Quinn following up on Raleigh, that actually impacted our areas. when it came to Med Ed, which is another electric distribution company, what was going on is you had all the major electric companies, Med Ed, PECO, PPL, just to name a few, Penelec, I'm not going to talk about that. All of them started receiving, of course, as we all did, the weather forecasts at the end of February. Med Ed, for example, began storm preparations and initiated its actual first storm call on March 1st. It began staffing its customer operations centers with line, substation, forestry, and fleet personnel on March 1st to prepare for the anticipated impact that was going to begin, or they thought would begin overnight between March 1st and March 2nd. There was logistical planning and storm preparation, which included defining key daily safety messages for the workforce based on the magnitude of the predicted event, continually reviewing weather forecasts, assessing and anticipating geographical impacts, reviewing the availability of resources, establishing resources needs by location, again, reviewing, establishing, initiating external communications with governmental agencies at the state level. That would be PEMA, Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, who coordinates at the state level with all other state agencies, including the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, at the local level with the county, and at the municipal level. Reviewing customer contact center staffing and messaging, then requesting full-time equivalent resources. Med Ed, as part of this, had requested on February 28th, 160 line full-time equivalent resources. And then on March 2nd, they requested an additional 400 line full-time equivalent resources. They worked through mutual aid process, and you can see how even with Hurricane Ida, the reports were of the number of assistance they were going to be receiving from other utility companies throughout the United States. Med Ed in this particular instance actually received a total of 604 line workers and 220 damage assessors to respond during the period of March 2nd through March 8th. PECO did something very similar. They started their internal review. They established their storm centers. They looked at their service territory in relation to any relocation of existing services buildings. They adjusted resources, supply locations for potential storm development. They contacted Orange and Rockland utilities, tree services, electric construction, rural electric cooperative, Corning Natural Gas Company, and they had one company, Osmos, for damage assessment, bringing in additional resources. PPL on February 28th conducted a system outage modeling based on weather forecasts, notified internal emergency response personnel of hazardous outlook of the system modeling. They canceled time off requests. They verified internal resources of line, electrical trouble, and accessories by region. They verified contractor line resources. They notified contractor leadership to prepare for storm activation. They created a damage assessment, restoration strategies per region, and based on the predicted storm impact. On March 1st, they updated system outage modeling. They reconfirmed personnel. They discussed predicted outages. On March Second, the PPL's command center increased its staffing at the PPL System Operations Center, overnight coverage for the customer service representatives. Additionally, they were monitoring on social media for storm-related activity. They posted storm preparedness information on the website and on social media. They planned for basic things like housing and feeding the accommodations for contractor resources. So a lot was going on during that time period. As it relates to PPL, on March 2nd at 7 a.m., they started with 250 PPL line personnel, 55 contractor treat crews, 185 contractor line personnel prearranged for storm response. On March 2nd, 108 line personnel were received. On March 3rd, 64 line personnel were received. On March 4th, they received 11 line personnel. On March 5th, they had 277 line personnel were received. On March 6th, they had 213 line personnel were received. And on March 7th, they had 7 line personnel were received. The utility restoration response in terms of the peak number of reported outages for Med-Ed occurred at 8 p.m. on March 2nd. And Med-Ed's restoration efforts, after 72 hours, Med-Ed had restored approximately 68% of its customers from the peak number of outages that it began with. As compared to similar storms from Med-Ed's perspective, Med-Ed ranked Raleigh and Quinn second in terms of the number and duration of outages, with approximately 49% of its customers experiencing a sustained outage. In comparison, approximately 54% of Med-Ed's customers experienced a sustained outage with Sandy. With regard to PPL's restoration efforts after 72 hours, PECO had restored approximately 89% of its customers from the peak number of outages. And then PPL restored about 96% of its customers from the peak hours after 96 hours. And PECO had full restoration by March 10th at 2 p.m. PECO ranked Raleigh and Quinn third in terms of number and duration of outages, with approximately 800,000 customers experienced storm-related outages, in comparison to about 850,000 customers experiencing storm-related outages during Sandy. PECO use, and all the utilities, they use media, they use social media, Twitter and Facebook and print and radio and TV. Today, all of us, electric, gas, water, we're using more social media than print media, because there is so many of our customers who are on social media, also using radio and TV. Just to highlight PPL for a moment, PPL restoration efforts after 72 hours, PPL has restored approximately 80% of its customers from the peak number of outages, and 91% of its customers from the peak after 96 hours. PPL had full restoration by March 10th at 2:45 a.m., approximately 8 days after the initial outage. So one thing that happened after this particular storm, the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission actually conducted a staff, and a lot of the information I shared with you was included in their report. And then they had some recommendations. And for the recommendation, I'll just highlight for you, there were many more, there were actually 12. Continue cooperation, communication with county 911 centers and emergency management agencies, meeting with county officials annually to review emergency procedures and expectations for responses and road closures, and the liaison process, working with local and county authorities on a proactive basis to identify and remove on off right-of-ways those trees, and then consider storm hardening and climate adaptation as programs to be addressed through the long-term infrastructure improvement plans. Remember, I talked about the DISC and the plans that had to be submitted in order to get a DISC approved. And it's called a long-term infrastructure improvement plan. And there are 5 years, as I mentioned to you. And so they suggested that the utility companies included in new plans or modifying their plans to address storm hardening. And so when we talk about storm hardening from a electric perspective, you're looking at being proactive and planning your investments. And that's where that long-term infrastructure improvement plan comes into play. You're looking at replacing vulnerable poles. And when we talk about storm hardening, I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's really just a catch-all phrase for a variety of physical improvements that make utility infrastructure less vulnerable during extreme weathers. And so looking at that, you're looking at replacing vulnerable poles, reinforcing existing infrastructure. That's replacing thousands of poles, adding wires, using special treatment to make poles harder to break. Underground selectivity or burying power lines. Now, we know it's expensive, but in certain areas, it can prevent a lot of problems. Elevating power equipment and creating barriers in flood-prone areas. Raising the level of power stations to keep it above water during floods. Employing the latest technology, the power grid, which is so very important. Many of these storm hardening infrastructure improvement is actually covered under DISC. And that's why today I highlighted that particular tool that is in place in Pennsylvania and how the legislation that was enacted, the regulation by the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, the implementation of DISC, and how that has worked and will continue to enhance infrastructure replacement, acceleration, and improvement to make so that we can have safe and reliable service. Is it going to completely prevent outages? No, it's not. But it's going to reduce the time for restoration. It's going to, in some instances, build in minimal, some redundancy so that we don't face what other states have faced. Pennsylvania actually is known to be a progressive state, and the Public Utility Commission is progressive in terms of the tools that they have implemented to accelerate infrastructure improvement as compared to some of the other states here in the United States. So I'm briefly going to just talk a little bit about water. So unlike the electric, gas, the wastewater industry or the wastewater sector is highly fragmented. In the United States, there are 53,000 water and 16,000 wastewater systems. And it's being provided by homeowner associations. I know for Pennsylvania American Water Company, we have been working with a homeowner association because they've asked us to acquire their system. Their systems are just mains that are in the roads and the laterals that's going to the up to the property line. And they want us to acquire the system. And this is out in Western Pennsylvania and Clarion. But the providers, when we talk about 53,000, homeowners associations, resorts, and individual wells, wastewater with septic systems, to municipal-owned systems, and to large utility systems like American Water and Pennsylvania American and Aqua, just to name a few here in Pennsylvania. The American Society of Civil Engineers in 2018 infrastructure report graded Pennsylvania's water and wastewater systems a D and a D minus. Their cast iron pipes from the 1890s can last 112 years, while newer pipes installed after the World War II have average life of 75 years. That used and useful life of pipes can vary based on factors such as soil conditions, material used, pipe installation practices, and the character of the water flow through pipes. For regulated water companies like Pennsylvania American Water, companies have access to capital, the regulatory tools such as DIS that we've talked about, experience, expertise, dedicated and trained staff has certainly made a difference in terms of infrastructure improvements in Pennsylvania. And as I shared with you on the water side, from a DIS perspective, has been in place for the water industry since 1996. And so what has that looked like for Pennsylvania American? With regard to what we have invested over from 2006 to 2020, 3.86 billion in terms of system improvements, replacement and upgrade to treatment plants, storage tanks, pumping stations to meet regulatory standards and to provide continued reliable service. As it relates specifically to pipes of main, this chart shows prior to this where we were at and where we have been since 1997 with regard to DIS and the miles that we have replaced. Over the past decade, we have replaced more than 1,000 or 1,700 miles of main here in Pennsylvania. There are other states now who have the DIS. Pennsylvania was the first state to have a DIS in place for water utility companies. And also Pennsylvania was the first state to have a DIS that was in place with legislation for gas and electric companies. Water utilities depend on our brethren in the electric industry. And so there is coordination throughout the year, designated liaisons. We actually host the electric, gas, water through the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. We host interactive emergency preparedness tabletops, which have been critical to addressing emergency preparedness on a yearly basis. So I've talked a lot about infrastructure improvement, and I can't stress enough how important it has been for us in Pennsylvania to have that distribution system improvement charge in place. And what you see on your utility bill is minimal in terms of that surcharge. Sometimes it can be just a penny or 5 cents on a monthly bill. It's critical. It has allowed the water industry to invest significantly in main replacement. It has allowed our electric and our gas companies on the distribution side to do many of the things that has minimized disruption of service through outages as relates to storms. Are we finished? No. There's so much more that we will continue to do to enhance our systems to make sure that we're providing safe and reliable service to our customers, so that when I first started in the water industry with my expectation that when I turned that faucet on, the water was going to come out, it was not going to be discolored, and that I could actually ingest the water to make sure that the customers that we serve, who have no idea what it takes to keep an electric grid going, to provide that electric service, to provide that gas service, and to provide that water service. Whether it's a storm, whether it's a cyber attack, whether it's COVID-19, to keep it going.
Well, thank you, Susan, and very fascinating. So many ties with the energy industry, and thank you for bringing them up. So what we normally do during these seminars is have a Q&A session, of course, and we invite the students to have the first dibs on questions for Susan. So students, if you're unmuted, if you're muted, unmute yourself and introduce yourself and ask the question. So I'll wait a few minutes for each of you to, or whoever wants to ask a question, please ask Susan a question. Questions for Susan?
Hi, I'm Dana, and I really enjoyed your presentation. So I have a question about with replacement of water mains, do you receive any funding from either the state or the township or city, or does that replacement rely solely on the water utility company?
So we do not receive any funding from local governments. We have received what's called loans. It's called Pinvest loan. Previously, for municipals, they are able to receive a grant. Public utility companies are not eligible for grants. The number of loans that we've received have been minimal. Many times what has happened is through acquisitions, particularly perhaps of a smaller system, a troubled system, they may have a Pinvest loan, and we will do one or two things at closing. We will, depending on what we're paying for it, in some instances, particularly with smaller systems, we will assume that loan and pay it off. In other instances, as a part of the terms and conditions of the acquisition, there's an agreement that will be paid off. And as a part of that, we will pay it off on behalf of the utility, on behalf of the smaller system. Our dollars are through the capital that we raise and the investments that we make. And then, you know, of course, to repay on the capitals that we're investing through investments and loans is through DISC and through rate cases.
It's really interesting. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Dana.
Any other questions from students?
Yes. Hi, Susan. I'm Laura. I really enjoyed your presentation. I was just curious if, aside from the potential for more frequent storms, if you expect to see other threats to water infrastructure due to climate change.
That is an excellent question. I know that American Water has a research team that includes scientists who continue to look at many things. And one of the things that they're actually looking at is climate change. I think all of us are doing that. We work with the American Water Works Association. There's a think tank there that is involved in reviewing and evaluating climate change as well. So it is something that we look at, we research, and we evaluate because we don't know what may actually happen in the future. We know that, I think all of us know that, you know, what's going on, some of the things that we're experiencing. You know, we used to talk about the 100-year storm. In some instances now we're talking about the 5-year storm or the 1-year storm. And it's a part of that's been attributed to climate change.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Questions from students? Questions for Susan? And if you are too shy to talk, you can always go to the chat box and drop in that question. And Susan Canarac and I would go through them and articulate those questions. Questions for students, from students?
I have a question that is mine, but particularly with the students. What is your expectation in terms of when there is a storm and there is an outage? What is your expectation in terms of restoration, that time frame?
Excellent. Students, you're supposed to answer this question.
just curious.
I guess my expectation would be within hours rather than a day.
Me too. I'm the same way. I mean, I work in this industry, but my expectation, if I am home and it's the winter time and there's an outage and I don't have a source of heat, I mean, there's just the practical day-to-day things that we think about, that we take for granted. You know, what is that impact? What am I going to do? It's unless you're in this industry, or you have friends or colleagues or relatives who know what it takes, what it's all entails. That's why I kind of, you know, talked about the planning that PICO and MedEd and PPL were doing, because you're thinking, I want it now. I don't want it later. I want it now, right? Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
I have another question.
Yes, Laura.
Okay.
Sure.
So in some of our classes, we've been talking about integrated resource planning documents for utilities with regard to predicting future energy usage and how to plan for increased demand. So I'm curious if there's a similar process that happens with water, planning for potentially increased demand or especially like on the West Coast as we're drawing more water out from the rivers, if there's a plan for meeting demand from other sources.
Absolutely. Integrated resource planning goes on in all utility companies, and water is no different. That planning goes on, trying to, and then because you have to plan and provide for and find resources, right? And so at one point, American Water had a collaboration in Florida with the desalination plant, right? That planning for that plant, the planning before the planning for that plant was 10 years or so. And then to build it, make sure it's functioning, absolutely. And then we see what's going on right on the West Coast in terms of where they are. And American Water has one of its regulated companies, California American, located on the West Coast. Their needs are different from our needs here in Pennsylvania. And then, we look at the wildfires that are going on, right, in western part of the United States, particularly California, and what impact is that having on water and water resources? Absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any more questions from students? If not, I'll open up the floor for questions from the general audience, everybody. Questions for Susan? So Susan, I have a question. I know Laura brought up this question about integrated resource planning, and you mentioned that just as electric utilities are have an obligation to do that, water companies like yours has to do it. How much coordination is there? Because there's a lot of tie-ins, similar kind of impacts during climate change. So you speak to the level of coordination among different utilities, electric utilities, water, and gas?
Sure, absolutely. There's a great deal of coordination within the utility industry. In particular, there's a great deal of coordination with the water, wastewater, and gas, because we're all in that same trench, right? With the pipes and replacement of main, or in places where there's growth and there's a need for water, wastewater, and then gas is going in, and coordinating those efforts, developing those plans from just in general. With regard to the integrated resource planning, actually, one of the beauties things is that the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission is also involved in some of the oversight of the integrated resource planning amongst utilities. They have actually, they had a dedicated staff, and at some points, the plans are actually submitted to the commission. Working groups are established, stakeholder groups are established, and we're meeting with regard to those plans and coming up with ways in which we can work more closely on specific areas within specific time frames or specific time periods. So there's definitely a lot of coordination, collaboration with the utility industries. You're looking at the water, and we need power, right? How much power do we need? We're planning that, and then the power that we need, and do we have backup source? Do we, because power may go out, do we have water that's available in another part of our distribution system, right? That we can feed into another particular area in the event that there is a power outage, right? Do we have backup generators? How soon will you be able to restore service? What are your plans for building in, and I'm not talking about gold plating, but building in some minimal redundancy so that if you have to shift, we can shift also. So all that coordination certainly is needed and is actually done to minimize impacts on our industry. Yes.
Thank you. Questions for Susan?
Actually, I have one more question. So going back to when you were talking about the storms that happened, the snowstorms in March, can't remember their names, Harley or something like that. The response time they were talking about, like, how does that relate to like the standard of the industry? Was that a good response time? Were you guys looking to bounce back faster than that? How does that compare to your standards?
Sure. So in terms of the response time, the fact that you had Riley and then you had Quinn, could we have done better? Yes. And some of that required coordination and collaboration because there were so many trees that were down, and coordinating at the county level, the municipal level, and to move some of the trees to the non right-of-ways was an issue. The impact in being able to travel to get from point A to point B. And so that was why one of the recommendations that came out from the report from the Pennsylvania Public Utilities staff was not only continuing communication, because at one point, this was several years ago, there was major outages and they were over a long period of time. And one of the things that the PUC determined that there was lack of communication coordination. I shared the response time and the number of outages as compared to when it was Sandy. So it had been reduced. And so there's always a movement afoot to reduce that restoration time. Had it just been Riley, not Quinn, the restoration time would have been sooner. But back to back, that same time period, it was very difficult.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have time for one or two more questions? One or two more
I have a
questions?
question.
Yes,
I have a question.
Hi, Karen.
Hi, thank you so much for talking about Quinn and Riley. And I work at PPL and I was very heavily involved in that storm. I was exhausted. Like I did not work at the company during Sandy. I worked for a federal senator at the time. So I was the one that was harassing PPL. And then now I was on the other side and oh my God, that was something else. But anyway, in terms of cybersecurity and the impact on the infrastructure from cybersecurity attacks, because we heard about the pipeline attack several months ago that is frightening and keeps everyone up at night. Like, I don't know, like what more could we be doing? We like, we have on the utility level, like attacks all the time. And we just have to be vigilant. I am so paranoid about clicking on anything. But like, if you want to just, expand upon that, I didn't
Sure.
quite catch your talk in the beginning. So
Sure.
maybe you did cover that, but
Sure.
I don't know what other, like how else we could stay ahead of this when it just
Right.
feels like it's a constant deluge.
Sure. So a couple of things that we in the utility industry, one is training. And that's been done at the state level. Particularly, I know the Public Utility Commission's had these black box sky exercise. So they've had the gas, electric, water, and you go through an exercise. They started that about 2 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago. It may have been, I think that's thereabouts. So it's training. And that training has to come down to those like me and you know, in terms of what we're doing just with our emails, right? The other is training on awareness for our folks who are monitoring the grid or the SCADA system. If there's anything that looks even the slightest suspicious, to make sure that there are the protocols that are in place to make the necessary decisions with regard to that. The third thing is, you know, investing in the necessary technology so that you can block that from coming in. And I know that there, you know, there are dollars that have been invested and will continue to be invested. But it's not just the utility industry, it's all the companies in the industry. So this is a nationwide issue, concern for the United States, federal, state, local, private industry, public industry. And we cannot let our guard down at any time. We just can't.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think, yeah, our time is up. And thank you. Thank you, Susan. And really appreciate it. You know, we're so dependent upon water, electricity, and gas, you know, and I think it's not the other critical infrastructure, it is another critical infrastructure. They're all equally wanted, equally needed, and especially during climate change, to have the same sense of reliability be a difficult task, and best of luck. You know,
Absolutely.
it was very illuminating, this parallels between what water has, you know, what you need to do to assure steady, reliable water supply, as it is the electric people have to do to assure the same steady electric supply. I just want to remind you that we will have a seminar on energy risk management. It's on September 20th, not 16th, as was in the chat box. It'll be by one of our former students, Chris Eshelman, and I hope to see you guys at that presentation. It'll be a week from next Monday. And Susan, thank you for your presentation. And we're hoping that we can get a copy of the slides in case, and so.
Yes, absolutely. I will send that. I think it's Susan I've been in contact with, so I will send that to her. And I want to thank you, and I want to thank the students and others. Really appreciate it. Again, I am so very happy. I was able to work my way through the freeze on my screen. I did find out I needed to do the Zoom update. So I did that and it worked. So thank you so much. I apologize for the delay. Good discussion. And I wish everyone the very best. Thank you.
Thank you all. And good
Thank you.
afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. How you doing, Mr. Rudy?
Yeah, Susan, the seminar is on September 20th, not 16th.
No, the 16th is for our info session. I put two different things here.
Oh, okay.
I put, if you look above that, I said, join us for the next seminar on Monday, September 20th. Speaker will be Chris Eshelman of EPRI, topic energy risk management. And the second one was about our info session, if anyone was interested, because there were some students in here.
Oh, good. No, thank you. I didn't, I just saw on the calendar, we have something on September 16th. Okay, got it. All right, it was a great talk.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I apologize. I'm down here at TE and it's, I don't know what the deal is. I think it's because I don't have the headset